Okay, so hello, and today I'm going to revise. I'm not teaching. I'm revising my. Okay. Today I'll revise the anatomical landmarks of the teeth. Okay, so this is a part of dental anatomy and dental histology. Basically, dental anatomy. I'm using Wheelers right now. So if you want to open your Wheelers, you can. You're free to open. Okay, so let's begin. Anatomical landmarks of teeth. First is a cusp. So a cusp is a elevation or a mound on the crown of a tooth. So what do you mean by an elevation? Elevation is a उठा हुआ हिस्सा, मतलब या उभरा हुआ हिस्सा. माउंड मीन्स ऑल्सो अ माउंड मीन्स कुछ रखा हुआ है ज़्यादा में, मतलब ज़्यादा किसी चीज़ का भी ज़्यादा रखा हुआ होता है तो वो जैसे माउंड बन जाता है. बालू डालो तो वो माउंड बन जाता है ना. वही है, ये फ्लोर है अगर तो ये माउंड है ना. तो दिस इज एन एलिवेशन और अ माउंड ऑन द क्राउन ऑफ अ टूथ which makes up a divisional part of the occlusal surface. So this makes up a divisional part of the occlusal surface means this you can recognize this on the occlusal surface. Now what do you mean by the occlusal surface? For example, this is the teeth and okay. So whatever surface is on top, this is the occlusal surface. So where we chew or bite, that is called the occlusal surface. The top of any teeth, top or the surface, the top of enamel, or in case of maxillary teeth, the surface used to chew is called the occlusal surface. Okay. Now tubercle. The cusp is an elevation or a mound on the crown of a tooth which makes up a divisional part of the occlusal surface. So this is a cusp. This is a cusp. This is a cusp. Okay. Now tubercle. Tubercle is a smaller elevation, a small elevation, or when comparison to a cusp, it is smaller. A smaller elevation on some portion of the crown produced by an extra formation of enamel. So if this is a cusp, then a tubercle will be a smaller elevation like this. Now this is, ये हमारे में नहीं होता है, मतलब ऐसा नहीं होता है. आई एम जस्ट एक्सप्लेनिंग कि ये छोटा सा एलिवेशन होगा ऑन सम पोर्शन ऑफ द क्राउन. दिस एंटायर पोर्शन इज द क्राउन produced by an extra formation of animal means extra deposition of animal, and there will be an extra deposition of animal, and it will be just a bit less elevated than a cusp, but it is prominent. You can see it, feel it. Okay, so that is a tubercle is a smaller elevation as compared to cusp on some portion of the crown produced by an extra formation of animal, means animal is more in this region. Okay. Now 3 is cingulum. This is not lingulum, this is cingulum. Okay, Excuse my handwriting. Or it is also called as linguocervical ridge. Linguocervical ridge. So, cingulum in Latin means this is the Latin word for girdle. You might know about the girdles in the body, and this means lingual lobe of an anterior tooth. Now, what is lingual? Linguals means towards the tongue or opposite to the lips and the buccal and the cheek. So this is present in the inside of the of anterior teeth. Anterior teeth are incisors and canines. Lingual lobe of an anterior tooth that makes up the cervical one third of the lingual surface. So if this is for example an anterior teeth, for example let's say central incisor, then in this region there is an elevation or sort of a lobe that makes up the cervical. Now this is the cervical line and this is the crown. So, and lingual surface, this we are seeing from the inside. So this is one third. This one third elevated portion is known as cingulum or linguocervical ridge, because this is present lingually and in nearer to the cervical line. So the lingual lobe of an anterior tooth that makes up cervical one third of the lingual surface, it also represents the lingual lobe of anterior tooth of anterior teeth. Okay, now its convexity mesiodistally represents resembles the resembles a girdle encircling the lingual surface at the cervical third. So it also represents the lingual lobe of an anterior teeth. We know this. Its convexity mesiodistally. Now, what is mesiodistal? Let's say this is the right central incisor. Okay. Now, for the right central incisor, this will be the midline, mid-sagittal plane. So this is right, left. So this is mesial and this is distal. Now its convexity mesiodistally. So like this, its convexity mesiodistally will resemble a girdle encircling the lingual surface at the cervical third. So basically the same thing, but difficult language. Encircling the lingual surface at the cervical third. So this encircles the lingual surface, means interior portion, at the cervical third, means from this side one third and this is two third. Okay. So cingulum or linguocervical ridge is the lingual lobe of an anterior tooth that makes up cervical one third of the lingual surface. Lingual lobe of an anterior tooth that makes up cervical one third of anterior. Lingual lobe of an anterior tooth that makes up cervical one third of the lingual surface. Okay, let's see. Fourth, ridge. There are many kinds of ridges, we'll discuss them now. But what is a ridge first? Ridge is any linear elevation on the surface of a tooth. It is named according to its location. Now, any linear elevation on the surface of a tooth. Now, you we already know what a linear elevation is, like उठा हुआ हिस्सा और लंबा, है ना, उठा हुआ लंबा हिस्सा. तो any linear elevation on the surface of a tooth, it is known as a ridge. It is named according to its location. For example, marginal ridge, triangular ridge, labial ridge, buccal ridge, cervical, oblique, and transverse. Okay. So let's discuss all of them now. First is marginal ridge. Now, marginal ridge is a rounded border of enamel that forms the mesial and distal margins or boundaries. Marginal means margins of the occlusal surfaces of premolars and molars, as well as the mesial and distal margin of the lingual surfaces of the incisors and canines or anterior teeth. So, which will be the marginal ridge? This entire thing will be the marginal ridge. So, these are rounded borders of enamel. Obviously, because it is present in the crown, so rounded borders of animals that forms the mesial and distal margins of occlusal surface of premolar and molar. This if we look at the teeth like this, I don't remember which teeth this is, but chalega, okay. So this will be the marginal ridge. This will be elevated slightly. This is the occlusal view, means we're looking at teeth from the top or bottom for maxillary teeth. Okay, so bottom means from the top actually. Okay, so this is, let's say, mesial, distal, labial, and lingual. No, this is buccal actually. Buccal. Okay, so buccal, हाँ ठीक है, wrong भी हो सकता है ऊपर नीचे, but just try to understand. So marginal ridge is a rounded border. This is rounded like this. उठा हुआ, ऐसा उठा हुआ होगा. Rounded border of animal that forms the mesial and distal margins of occlusal surface of premolars and molars, and the mesial and distal margins of lingual surface of incisors and canines, because this is present lingually. Okay, so this upward from the plane of paper is lingual surface, so these things are called as marginal ridges. So rounded borders of animal that form the mesial and distal margins of occlusal surfaces of this thing, premolars and molars, and the mesial and distal margins of the lingual surfaces of incisors and canines or anterior teeth, and this is posterior teeth. Okay. Okay, right now. Sure. Now, marginal ridge is done. Now, triangular ridge. A triangular ridge are ridges that descend from the tips of cusp of molars and premolars towards the central part of occlusal surface. Okay, right now. So, triangular ridges are the ridges that descend from tips of cusps of molars and premolars of posterior teeth towards the central part of occlusal surface. Means they are slightly they are going downwards, okay, and they are also named so because they are their slopes slopes of each side of the occlusal surface are inclined to resemble two sides of a triangle. So triangular means triangular, so मतलब triangle है ना. So they are also named because of their slope, because the slope of each side of their occlusal surfaces are inclined to resemble two sides of a triangle. Okay, this is how it is. Okay, so this is the triangular ridge. So like it will be something like this. So they are named after the cusps to which they belong. Okay, so triangular ridges are ridges that descend from the tips of cusps of posterior teeth towards the central part of occlusal surface. Towards the central part of occlusal surface. They are also named so because of their slope, because the slope of each side of their occlusal surfaces are inclined to resemble two sides of a triangle. Now, labial ridge. The ridge extended vertically from cervical ridge to cusp tip of canine. So we don't know about cervical ridge actually. We'll read it next. So labial ridge is the ridge that extends vertically on any teeth. For example, this is a teeth, and this extends vertically from cervical ridge. There will be a ridge here to cusp tip of canine. This is how the labial ridge will be on the anterior, not anterior, posterior. So this is towards the lips. Yes, means you look at it from the anterior side, सामने से है ना. So this is how it will be. ridge extended vertically from cervical ridge to cusp tip of canine. Only in canines. This is only found in canines. So canines is not shaped like this, but something like this. So I don't know. I haven't studied the shape of a canine right now. So यही है भाई, है ना. Labial ridge is the ridge extended vertically from cervical ridge to cusp tip of canine. Now, labial cervical ridge. The ridge forming the cervical one third of facial surfaces of all teeth. So this is a ridge that forms the cervical one third of facial surfaces. Means the surface which we can see when we look at someone's face. That is buccal and labial. Facial surface constitutes buccal and labial surfaces. So the cervical ridge is present on all the teeth in their facial surfaces. If it is anterior teeth, then it will be buccal. If it is posterior teeth, then it will be labial. No. If it is if it is anterior teeth, it will be labial, and for posterior teeth, it will be buccal. So it is a ridge forming the cervical one third. Means it begins from the cervical surface, and up to one third height or depth, if it is maxillary teeth, of the facial surface, buccal or labial surface. Okay, that is why it is named cervical ridge. Now, cervical ridge is done. Now, buccal ridge. Buccal ridge is the ridge extended vertically from cervical ridge to cusp tip of premolar. So, what is the difference between labial and buccal ridge? Just one difference. Labial ridge is only for canine, buccal ridge only for premolar. Only one difference. Yes, wait. Rest all the things are same. Labial ridge extended vertically from cervical ridge to cusp tip of canine. Buccal ridge extended vertically from cervical ridge to cusp tip of premolar. Okay, just remember, ridge extended vertically from cervical ridge to cusp tip of canine, and here ridge extended vertically from cervical ridge to cusp tip of premolar. Labial is for canine, buccal is for premolar. खत्म. ठीक. Now next, buccal ridge हो गया. Oblique ridge. Ridge present on occlusal surface of maxillary molars running obliquely from mesiolingual to distobuccal cusps. Now, this oblique ridge is a ridge present on occlusal surfaces of maxillary molars. So, maxillary molar, let's say, I don't know the shape, but ऐसे ही बना लेते हैं, है ना. अब बंदर के जाने आदर का स्वाद, है ना. तो this is present on the occlusal surface, means this is the occlusal view of maxillary molars running obliquely from mesiolingual. Let's say this is mesial, this is mesial, distal, lingual, and buccal. So this running obliquely from mesiolingual means this end to distobuccal cusp. Now this will be a cusp and this will be a cusp. So this runs like this, उठा हुआ होगा, है ना, यहाँ से यहाँ तक उठा हुआ होगा. So ridge present on occlusal surface of maxillary molars running obliquely from mesolingual to distobuccal cusps. Now let's read about the transverse ridge. This is a ridge formed by the joining of buccal and lingual triangular ridges. So this is a ridge formed by the joining of buccal and lingual triangular ridges. So this is lingual, let's say this is lingual triangular ridge and this is buccal triangular ridge. So I actually don't know how to draw this because मेरे को खुद को नहीं समझ आया है ना, मैं बस ऐसे ही तुक्का मार रहा हूँ, तो ये छोड़ दो, मैं नहीं समझाता हूँ, है ना, मेरे को खुद को नहीं पता है ना, तो ये नहीं समझाऊंगा, बस याद कर लो, मैं भी वही करूँगा. ट्रांसवर्स रिज फॉर्म्ड बाय द जॉइनिंग ऑफ बक्कल एंड लिंगुअल ट्रायंगुलर रिजेस. खत्म. ठीक. इट इज द यूनियन ऑफ टू triangular ridges transversely crossing the surface of a posterior tooth. ठीक. It is a ridge formed by the joining of buccal and lingual triangular ridges, and it is the union of two triangular ridges transversely crossing the surface of a posterior tooth. बस अब इसमें नहीं आता है तो क्या करेंगे, बस याद कर लो. Now all the ridges are done. Now let's talk about pits. Pits are small pinpoint depressions located at the junction of developmental growths or at the terminals of those grooves. Pits are small pinpoint depressions located at the junction of developmental grooves or at the terminals of those grooves. Now we'll learn about developmental grooves in a while. Example, central pit is a term used to describe a landmark in the central fossa of molars where developmental grooves join. Okay, so pits are small pinpoint depressions located at the junction of developmental grooves or at the terminals of those grooves. Means either at the junctions or terminals. Depressions located either at the junctions of developmental grooves or at the terminals of developmental grooves. Now, fossa. It is an irregular depression or concavity. Fossa is an irregular depression or a concavity. Now, there are many types of fossa. Fossae, so lingual fossae. On the lingual surface of incisors. Now, central fossae on the occlusal surface of molars. These are formed by the convergence of ridges terminating at a central point in the bottom of the depression, where a junction of grooves occurs. So, central fossae are present on the occlusal surface of molars, and they are formed by the convergence of ridges terminating at a central point in the bottom of the depression when a junction of grooves occurs. So, when grooves meet anywhere and they form a depression, okay, so that depression will be known as central fossa, because grooves are elevated, right? Grooves are elevated, no, grooves are depressed. So गड्ढा या नाली है ना, जहाँ दो तीन नाली मिलेंगे वहाँ पे सेंट्रल फोसा बनेगा, मतलब बीच में ही बनेगा सेंट्रल फोसा. इट इज ओनली प्रेजेंट इन मोलर्स. नाउ ट्रायंगुलर fossa found on the occlusal surface of molars and premolars, mesial or distal to marginal ridges. They are sometimes found on the lingual surfaces of maxillary incisors at the edge of the lingual fossa, where the marginal ridges and cingulum meet. So, triangular fossae are found on the occlusal surfaces of molars and premolars, mesial or distal to marginal ridges. So, they will either be on the right or left. Means if mesial or distal, we already know what mesial and distal is. So, they are found either on mesially or distally to marginal ridges, and they are sometimes found on the lingual surface of maxillary incisors, means on the inside towards the tongue surface of maxillary incisors at the edge of the lingual fossae, when the marginal where the marginal ridge and cingulum meet. So it will be like this. This will be the fossa, triangular fossa. They are sometimes found on the lingual surfaces of maxillary incisors at the edge of the lingual fossae, where the marginal ridges and cingulum meet. Okay, now sulcus, long depression or valley in the surface of a tooth between ridges and cusps. The inclines of which meet at an angle. So sulcus is a long depression, means lamba nali or valley in the surface of a tooth between ridges, means दो ridge के बीच में, between ridges and cusps, मतलब ridge और cusp जैसे उठा हुआ जो भी हिस्सा है उसके बीच बीच में नाली टाइप का बनता है ना। तो रिजेस और कर्व्स का जो दीवार होता है या इंक्लाइन होता है वहाँ एंगल से मिलते हैं, जैसे ये एक कर्व है और यहाँ एक रिज जा रहा है ऐसे, है ना। तो ये एक एंगल में मिला तो ये ऐसे लंबा लंबा होके वो नाली बनाएगा। नाली नाली का जैसे बंच ऑफ नाली है ना, इंटरसेक्टिंग एंड गोइंग आउटवर्ड्स, ऐसा ऐसा टाइप का कुछ बनेगा, है ना। ऐसा 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 ऐसा, ये सबको बोलते हैं सल्कस। लॉन्ग डिप्रेशन और वैली इन द सर्फेस ऑफ अ टूथ बिटवीन रिजेस एंड कट्स द इंक्लाइंस ऑफ विच मीट एट एन एंगल। Developmental, is this visible? No, just on the page. Okay. Developmental growths. Shallow groove in the on the surface of a tooth between the primary parts of the crown or root. Now, what is a primary part? Primary part is the basic parts from which a teeth are formed. Means सबसे पहले जो दो तीन चीज़ें बनती हैं, मतलब उसमें उन्हीं चीज़ों को प्राइमरी पार्ट्स बोला जाता है। उन्हीं वो सभी जोड़ के बाद में एक टीथ बनाते हैं। तो developmental grooves are shallow grooves on the surface of a tooth, shallow grooves between the primary parts of the crown or root. Now, what is a supplemental groove? It has distinct shallow linear depression on the surface of a tooth, but it is replaced, it is supplemental to a developmental groove and does not mark the junction of primary parts. So developmental grooves are shallow grooves between the primary parts of the crown or root, but supplemental grooves are not shallow grooves. They are shallow grooves, but they are not between the junction of primary parts of the roots. And supplemental grooves have distinct shallow linear depressions on the surface of a tooth. So supplemental means छोटा छोटा, ये supplemental grooves है, and this is the developmental groove. मतलब जो प्राइमरी पार्ट, मान लो ये प्राइमरी पार्ट एक बार एक साथ फॉर्म हुआ, ये एक साथ फॉर्म हुआ, तो इन दोनों के बीच वाला डेवलपमेंटल ग्रुप है। बट सप्लीमेंटल ग्रुप डज नॉट डिमार्केट द जंक्शन ऑफ प्राइमरी पार्ट्स, बट इट डिमार्केट्स सैलो लाइन्स और लीनियर डिप्रेशंस ऑन द सर्फेस ऑफ अ टूथ। This can be supplemental grooves. Now, buccal and lingual grooves are developmental grooves found on the buccal and lingual surfaces of posterior to teeth, respectively. So, buccal and lingual grooves are developmental grooves found on the buccal and lingual surfaces of posterior teeth. Now, lobe. What is a lobe? This is one of the primary sections of formation in the development of the crown. मीन्स प्राइमरी पार्ट जो बोल रहा था उसी को लोब बोलते हैं, है ना. लोब इज वन ऑफ द प्राइमरी सेक्शंस ऑफ फॉर्मेशन इन द डेवलपमेंट ऑफ द क्राउन. Cusps and mamelons are representative of lobes. So cusps तो पता है, mamelons अभी बताया जाएगा, है ना. Lobe is one of the primary sections of formation in the development of the crown. Cusps and mamelons are representative of lobes. Mamelon. Any one of three rounded protuberances found on the incisal ridges of newly erupted incisor teeth. Now, mamelon is any one of three rounded protuberances found on the incisor ridges of newly erected incisor teeth. These two gradually wear out to form a smooth surface due to chewing and biting and wearing away of the enamel slowly. Now, the anterior teeth are formed up of 4 lobes, 3 labial and 1 lingual. Now, last is line and point angles. Line angle. The junction between two adjacent surfaces, मतलब दो साइड बाय साइड सरफेस के बीच में जंक्शंस, named according to the two surfaces shared in its formation. सिंपल है, मतलब एंगल बिटवीन टू सरफेसेस, मतलब दो लाइन के बीच में, दो सरफेस के बीच में जो एंगल बनेगा वो है लाइन एंगल. पॉइंट एंगल दिख रहा है, नहीं दिख रहा है? हाँ दिख रहा है. द जंक्शन बिटवीन 3 एडजेसेंट सरफेसेस. आज थोड़ा वीडियो बनाने में लेट हो गया इसलिए इतना साउंड आ रहा है, तो क्या भी कर सकते हैं. नेम्ड according to the 3 surfaces placed shared in its formation. Now, point angle में 3 adjacent surfaces, यहाँ पे 2 adjacent surfaces. Okay, bye bye.